Hi everybody, welcome to Shivers Speaks. Today we are talking about folklore. So I'm a big fan of folklore. I think that the stories are very interesting and very entertaining. All of the folklore stories, well, most of the folklore stories have turned into scary stories, or at least some sort of myth that has given us lessons on behavior, on scary things, on what to avoid, what to be scared of, and all of that rooting back from ancient stories and texts, I think is very fascinating. So when you look at folklore stories, that's what they really are. They're stories. They're meant to provide a lesson. A lot of times they're written and their purpose is to give lessons and morals to children. So essentially, like, don't talk to strangers, or don't take candy from people you don't know. Don't go run off in the woods. These are all the underlying messages of folklore stories. And they're just kind of amplified with different characters, animals, things like that. Mythology is very similarly linked to folklore, but mythology has much more mysticism to it. There's a bigger stage. There's gods, there's different forces, there's like unreal phenomenon, things like that. That's what differentiates mythology from folklore. And the root of both of these things is that there are characters, there are people, there are animals, whatever you have in these stories, a lot of times that are actually captured as footage or evidence that these creatures ever did actually exist. A lot of different places have folklore stories. So the top locations for folklore storytelling is Scandinavia, which includes Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They really believe and told stories about giants, trolls, and the White Lady. If you Google the White Lady, she's pretty scary. But she's essentially this like lady of the lake, kind of similar to La Llorona, but she's this like ghostly ethereal being. These folklore stories inspired Snow White, the Snow Queen, the Little Mermaid, stories like that as well. Ireland is the next kind of top location. So they really obviously talk about leprechauns. They were the first region to actually talk about fairies. And out of all of the folklore characters, fairies I find to be the most interesting because you'll find them all over the board of different beliefs, of different understandings. There are some folklore stories and some beliefs that fairies are evil and that they want eternal life and they want youth. And so they'll capture children and bring them into the woods and essentially lure children away. There's other stories where fairies are these like earthly angels and they just can't be in their full form because otherwise they would be too powerful. So fairies are just little fallen angels. Either way you look at it, it's very fascinating. You then have sort of the outward way of talking about fairies, which are changelings. And so changelings are supposedly the evil version of fairies, and they are made from the birth of fairies and humans. So these changelings, there's a lot of different stories about them. Some say that they are these shapeshifters of sorts. Some say that these are the types of fairies that will lure children into the woods. Either way, they don't necessarily look like the stereotypical fairy. They look like little people who look like children. So that's where I think a lot of the storytelling kind of blends together with the changelings and the fairies of kind of who's who and who's taking children away. But either way, I find them very fascinating, and they stem from Ireland. So next for location, we have Japan. So they talk about the yokai, which is the raccoon dog, the tengu, which are folklore birds, and Yuri, which is essentially Sadako from The Ring. I was very surprised that she is included in a folklore story, but it is really said that if you watch certain videos, if you see certain things in Japan, then you have like a curse and you only have a limited time to survive. For Greece, we have, of course, Greek mythology. I won't bore you. It's back to school time. I'm sure you have to read the Odyssey. I know I did. But these mythological creatures include Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, Hercules, Medusa, many, many more. And then for the United States, we made it to the list. We really talk about, in terms of folklore, Paul Bunyan. The Jersey Devil pops up a lot, Bell Witch, and the Mothman. So all of these characters have actual locations, or really are from somewhere. So Mothman is from West Virginia. A lot of the story, a lot of the lore of the Mothman is that it's this creature that comes out at night and can be seen in the sky. It looks kind of like a person and a moth mixed together. There's lots of t-shirts with Mothman on them. There's lots of merch. That's what's also kind of entertaining and funny about all of these folklore stories, is that they're very marketed, and all of these stories kind of have merch and different things that you can purchase with them, which I think is very interesting. So Mothman is from West Virginia. Bigfoot and Sasquatch was actually found in California in 1950. So I did expect it to be a little bit older than that, but that was really where the first story of Bigfoot came from. The Chupacabra was found in Mexico. Some people say it was also found in Puerto Rico, but that wasn't until 1990, which is also really, really recent in comparison to some of these old other folklore stories that are from like 1800s. The Loch Ness Monster, that was from 1933 in Scotland. The Yeti and the Abominable Snowman was from 1951 in the Himalayas. And the Skinwalkers were started in southwestern United States, much more recent than not, which is why we have Skinwalker Ranch. Many more talks about shapeshifters and things like that today. Skinwalkers and shapeshifters are these creatures that if they look at you long enough, then they kind of become you. There's also different versions of that story where they'll kind of track you down and grab hold of you, take you captive, and then turn into you. So you're essentially kidnapped while there's another version of you walking around. Either way, Skinwalkers are scary, but Skinwalker Ranch is a good show to really talk about that. The Wendigo. I would say the Wendigo is probably my second favorite folklore creature. This is really rooted in Native American folklore. A lot of these Wendigo people, I guess you can call them people, are supposedly found in mountains. The lore is that it's these lost hikers who didn't have anything else to eat, so then they ended up eating other people, so they turned into cannibals. And when they turned into cannibals, there's this supernatural element that comes over them that turns them into these deadly creatures. For anybody who has played Until Dawn, Wendigos are in here. It's a great version of Wendigos to see, so check that out. I mentioned it before, but La Llorona, she is from Mexico. She is the Weeping Woman. There are many stories about her. There's a movie about her. It is this woman who looks like she's kind of crying on the side of the road. If you stop and if you have children, she'll take your children. Her whole desire is to be a mother, I guess, but she's just sad. She's just a sad lady. And then we have Baba Yaga. So Baba Yaga was from Slavic folklore, but this was really the root of Hansel and Gretel. And there's lots of stories about Baba Yaga. There's lots of Halloween costumes of Baba Yaga. It's essentially like head witch. Super stereotypical old lady living in the woods witch. And some additional characters that you might not know or have heard of before. We have the Ansai, which is from the Caribbean. The Coyote, which is said to be a trickster for Native American folklore. The Kitsune, which is Japanese folklore. The Banshee, which is Irish folklore. Banshee and the Siren. Siren is from Swedish folklore. These two are similar. So the Banshee is this screaming woman, this weeping woman. We're starting to see a trend here. It's all about these women who can't handle their emotions. That are turned into these supernatural characters. But the Banshee is this screaming woman, so it's said that if you're walking in the woods or walking near an abandoned town and you hear screaming, there's a Banshee and she'll come and get you. And then the Siren is the mermaid. So sirens are really believed to be original mermaids. They're supposed to be there's two different versions of the story. So one version of sirens is that they're these beautiful women and they essentially lure these men to the rocks. Another version of that story is that sirens are mermaids, but they are incredibly ugly, and they're so ugly that people drive away from them and then crash into the shore. So either way, they're both about creatures kind of luring you with noises and screams. The Kraken, this is from Norse folklore. We have Reynard the Fox, which is another version of a trickster from European folklore. The slit-mouthed woman from Japanese folklore. I know back in my early teen YouTube days, this was very popular on YouTube. The slit-mouthed woman is very scary, but also very interesting to read about. And then you have the Pied Piper from German folklore. There's a lot of sayings on you have to pay the piper, and this is where it really comes from. So apparently Peter Piper, or Pied Piper, whoever, he rid the town of rats and he wasn't paid. So he lured children away with his magical pipe as revenge. So this is where that saying of paying the piper comes from, because you have to pay him so he doesn't take your kids. Another version of folklore to talk about, as I just kind of mentioned, early YouTube days, there's a lot of these characters that have come out on YouTube as just scary creatures of the internet, but they have really made themselves into folklore characters. So you have Slender Man, which was started by Something Awful, which is the channel it came from, in 2009. So Slender Man is really about like stalking and abducting children or people who are in the woods. You then have The Rake, which came out in 2006 from Creepypasta. This character, they used to have it as a costume at Spirit Halloween. I don't know if they have it anymore, but the Rake is said to lurk near beds at night with the intent to cause paranoia and bad dreams. A little bit more innocent, I guess, than actually kidnapping people. You have Jeff the Killer, very iconic. Jeff the Killer is said to be by your bedside at night, and as soon as you close your eyes, he says, go to sleep. And if you open your eyes when you hear him say go to sleep, then he'll like rip your face up. You have the Smile Dog. This is more of a cursed image than it is an actual folklore character, but it says if you look at this image long enough, then you'll go insane. You have Momo, which is an art piece by Ketsuke Aisawa. Probably butchered that, I apologize. But similar thing. If you look at Momo for too long, it says to cause violent behavior by looking at the photo. And then you have Laughing Jack. This is another one that's kind of in the same genre of The Rake and Jeff the Killer. But Laughing Jack is a clown that befriends and then tortures children. So, as you can see, again, we have a lot about screaming women, upset women, crying women, and then we also have a lot about abducting children and all of these lessons for children. So really the psychology behind all of this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. All of these folklore stories are really made for moral lessons, but they're also all about managing fear and anxiety. It's about how well can you cope with the real world just by listening to some of these stories. A lot of these are also for exploring identity and social roles. So all of the folklore stories and even mythology stories will have the same layout as a regular story or a movie. So you'll have your archetypes, you'll have your villain, your hero, your sage, your innocent, all of these different characters. And then our folklore character adds a level of mysticism to these stories. So it helps when reading all of these things to kind of say, where do I fit in and what do I belong to? This is also a really good way to help children bring imagination and creativity to their writing, to their drawing, to their life. Challenges reality, it offers escapism. It's all the same things that regular movies and stories do, but just kind of more so because there's more lessons and magic. And then, of course, lastly, it brings about that collective, that community. You know, we're talking about it. It's very interesting to talk about folklore. It's very interesting to address where all of these stories have come from, what their cultures are, everything like that. And I mean, I find it fascinating. I think a lot of horror fans are into folklore just as much as I am. And so you have that sense of community. So that is a very high level of the presentation on folklore. If you're interested in learning more about it, I will probably be offering the presentation again sometime soon. So just stay tuned on Shivers Facebook page or meetup. Um, and yeah, also to mention, today is the first day that Duncan has pumpkin out. So happy official pumpkin season to everybody who celebrates pumpkin season. And I will see all of you next week. Thank you for listening, and I will see you soon.